Hey everyone, it is episode 27 of At Percussion, and today is January 31st, 2016. I'm your host, Casey Cangelosi, and with me as always are Megan Arns.
Hello.
Laura Black.
Hi.
Ben Charles.
Hi everybody.
And with us today is composer-percussionist Ivan Trevino. He's a Mallet Tech artist and was recently appointed visiting professor of percussion at Baylor University. He's a songwriter and rock drummer for the cello quartet Break of Reality. And most importantly for today, he is a renowned Game of Thrones fan. Ivan, how's it going?
Great, how are you?
Doing good. So your Game of Thrones video with your cello quartet has how many views?
I don't know. I think it might be close to 10 million now.
You're all Game of Thrones fans, is that correct?
Yeah, everyone in the band except for Laura Metcalf, the female who played in that video, has no earthly idea what's happening in Game of Thrones. And that horrifies like some of our fans that come to concerts and will talk to Laura about the show. And they'll be like, "Did you see the last episode?" And she'll be like, "Uh-huh." And she'll like scurry away.
Well, if you ever needed to kick her out of the band, that would be easy.
Right.
That would be why. I noticed she was a little out of tune a little bit too. She just wasn't as in it as the rest of you.
Casey's dying to be in Break of Reality. Just gonna have him here. He's dying.
Cool. Well, Casey, if something ever happens to me, I will make sure and let them know that you're around and that you can play like twice as fast as I can. I think they would love that.
That's real important for that Game of Thrones tune too. Hey, so are you all caught up on the show and the books and everything? Like, can we just ask everyone else to leave and we can talk about it?
I'm caught up on the shows. Yeah. My wife is a book reader in terms of Game of Thrones. But I'm not really. I got caught on with the shows and kind of have just kept it that way. But I am caught up, yeah, and I'm excited about what's going to happen next.
Okay, yeah.
You know, I'm not caught up and I haven't read the books, but my husband likes to tell me everything that happens, so I don't have to.
That must be nice.
You know,
it's great. I put forth no effort whatsoever, and I am, yeah.
And you're okay with that? You want the spoilers?
It's fine with me, yeah.
Yeah, my friend Aaron Stabell, Megan knows Aaron, his wife Sarah wants all of the spoilers. Like, she won't stop bugging him until he spoils every show that they're watching. It's hilarious.
Well, there's so many, and I mean, the reason it's so good is because it's so depthful and deep, and it's not just a story, it's like a whole mythos, you know?
Yeah.
The reason I finished all the books is because I wanted to be able to dive on the wiki pages and like research some of the things, and I didn't want to have spoilers when I just wanted to, you know, be able to, go around the wikis. Ben, are you even into this at all? Do you even know what we're talking about?
Conversation.
Ben's sitting there like, hey guys, this is a percussion podcast.
My brother likes it. Shout out to Joe Charles.
There you go.
Hey, Joe. I bet Joe goes to PASIC. Why don't you?
Yeah, Ben.
Poor Ben.
Ben, I'm just kidding, Ben. I'm sorry.
I'm not kidding. Very upset. Hey, so listen, we got a lot of Facebook questions, and I think as a lot of, well, we know for sure, and I imagine most of our listeners know, Ivan's music is just widely received and widely played. I think there's just honestly, very few percussion recitals I see, especially student recitals, where someone isn't doing something of Ivan's. In fact, I think in my door right now, there's like 10 of them huddled listening through the door.
I've got a 2+1 going on right now on a student recital.
Woo!
Right, and I've got songbook going next time, and we just did, they did something. And they did the one where you're on the same marimba, you know?
Yeah, that's the one Ben was talking about.
Ah, there we go. Yeah. Hey, so anyway, a lot of these questions are going to have a little bit of overlap, but the first one I see here that we highlighted, again from Brandon Arvey. Thanks so much, Brandon. What advice do you have for young composers to get their music out there? Also, your thoughts on giving away music for free as a means of getting noticed.
I think for young composers, utilizing things like YouTube and Facebook video and SoundCloud, that's really how people discover music now. Obviously, word of mouth is really important, and obviously going to a recital and seeing a piece that you're really inspired by. But that's really the new way to sort of get your music out there. And I think it's important for young people to take that part of their songwriting and composing just as serious as they do the actual process of writing music. So if that means spending a little bit of funds to rent a nice camera or to get some nice microphones to represent your music in a really kind of professional way, then I think people will be more likely to receive it or be inspired by it. But sometimes, even if your composition is really great, if it's hard to hear things or hard to really tell what's happening via the video or audio, that can be a detriment. So I think that's really important, and I actually think that's why a lot of us should have some sort of background in simple sound recording. Nothing crazy, but when I record here in my house, I'll just use GarageBand, but I have some decent mics, and I think it represents my pieces in a decent way. So that would be one part of my advice. And the other thing is Michael Burrett, my old teacher, Megan, and my teacher, he said to me once about songwriting and composing is to be honest with who you are and what you want to say musically. And I always try to do that in every piece that I compose. And I think that comes across, I hope. And I think that's really important for young people to think about. It's, you know, sometimes you can gravitate towards a particular composer or, you know, a particular songwriter and say, okay, I want to write like this person. And that's fine. But I think if you can find a way to be honest with how you want to sound, then I think that comes across a lot in people's music. Like Casey, I think that comes across in your music a ton. You're really honest about what you want to say as a musician, and I think people gravitate towards that. So I think that's really important to think about.
Yeah.
I always thought Casey's pieces were just ripping off Pius Chung pieces.
That's to the untrained ear, Ben. Maybe you should go back to doctor
Maybe if I was
school.
at PASIC, I would have heard.
Yeah, right. You would have figured it out if you were at PASIC. well, Ivan, thanks for the compliment, and I'll shoot one right back at you. I mean, it's awesome that it is so genuine, and it does seem like you have a sound and you have a style, and it's very easy to recognize. Do you ever? I'm curious because I feel like people. The only reason someone wouldn't be honest is if they're trying to adhere to some type of academic standard, or they're trying to do what they think they're supposed to do, or they're trying to impress. Have you ever received criticism for, like, you know, why don't you write something 12-tone? Why don't you write something more, you know, more out there? Like, your music is too easy to listen to. Do people ever say stuff like that?
You know, no one has ever said that to me personally, but knowing some of the academic components of what we do probably wouldn't surprise me. But that's okay. I don't think I try to write music that is going to make the intellectual academic ear gravitate necessarily towards my music. That's not the person or listener that I'm shooting for. If they like it, awesome, that's great. But I don't think about that type of listener or trying to impress that sort of person. And I don't really think about the other extreme either. I think I just think about what comes out of me in a natural sort of way. And I think that's the most important thing for a composer to do. And you're right, Casey. I think we all have our own voice, and that's really important. I think it's okay to have your own style, and it's okay for people to say, "Hey, I think that's a Trevino piece or a Cangelosi piece." I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, no doubt. You know, speaking of your pieces, I just heard Omar Carmenedas perform Flow.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's a hard piece.
Yeah, they did great. He did it with a high school, McCashin High School, I believe they were called.
Yeah.
I was at GMEA, and
That's awesome, man. Omar's part is really hard in that particular piece. I wrote that piece for Eric Willie, Dr. Eric Willie, and I remember during the writing process, he said, "Can you make it a little more difficult?" And I said, "Sure." So then I made it really hard, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is really, really hard." And I said, "Well, should I find a happy balance?" And he said, "No, let's keep it. Let's have something for people to strive for technically." But I'm sure Omar's awesome. He's a sweet guy and an amazing musician. I'm sure he rocked it, man.
Yeah, Omar's a beast, and that program too. McKeecher and Anthony Cananzi is a good friend of ours. He's also an awesome percussionist and educator. So I'm sure his students rocked it.
That's awesome. I hope there's a recording.
Yeah.
I had a quick question, actually, because Eric's name came up, and we're talking about finding your voice as a composer and all. And I know Eric, I think, took a bunch of your pieces and made like a marching percussion show out of it. Is that right?
Yeah.
I've seen a couple of like percussion ensemble arrangements of like 2+1 or something like that. What, as a composer, when you hear your voice as interpreted and reinterpreted, so to speak, by other people, what have your experiences and thoughts been with that?
I really like it. And I have to tell you, the way that I compose music is some people are very literal about every single detail in the score, about every single nuance, every single shading, every single thing that happens. And I tend to be the opposite. And one of the reasons why I'm like that is because I like for each performance of a piece of my music to be different than other interpretations of it. I like to give the performer the ability to have their own way of playing my pieces, so that when I hear all of these different recordings, they all sound a little different. I think that's kind of fun. So that's kind of how I view it. So in that same light, I think that I enjoy hearing my voice in this marching world that I've never really been a part of. I know very little about it. But it sounds awesome, and it's incredible that so many people can play together in a cohesive kind of way. It's so impressive. And I don't have any reservations about it. I think it's cool, and I trust a lot of the people that are arranging these tunes. Like Eric, I totally trust him to do a show of my music, because he's played a lot of my music, and I think he understands how it works.
Sorry, to go back to the first part of that the last Facebook question, we were talking about sound recording. We've talked about that, the basics of it and how people get started on it quite a bit on this podcast, and we interviewed John Parks about it a little bit too. And I know Casey's, big things is saying that, you just have to experiment with it. You just have to get your hands into it and just kind of figure it out yourself. I'm wondering how you got started with the recording stuff. If it was also you just kind of started reading about it online and trying to figure it out yourself, trial and error, or what your process was.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Megan. I have no formal training in any of the sound recording stuff. Mm-hmm. So it was just trial and error, just doing research online about different microphones to get, experimenting with mic placement, experimenting with different small effects that you might use when recording, until you get the sound that you want. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how, I don't know, my band, for example, that's how we function. We figure out all of these little things and how to do them on our own. And it seems to be, like, for example, recording marimba or recording cello, there's not a ton of people who know how to do that really well, or there's not a ton of people that can get the sound that you really want out of it. So I'm kind of a firm believer that if you want to do something well, sometimes it's, you might be the best person to do it, even if you're not too familiar with, how to make it happen. I think you can figure it out.
Yeah, I think there's so much value to that, and I think in a world where everything is kind of at our fingertips, sometimes we're waiting to be taught something. And thinking back to some of the things that I feel the most comfortable with, or the things I feel like I do the best, I taught myself, or I went and found it because I was passionate about it and I had a reason to learn it, rather than being taught taught it in school and then, you know, filing it away and maybe coming back to it later or something.
You know,
Yeah.
if I could make it analogous to a snow day. So we had a gnarly snow day here, and I thought, okay, it'd be great if I could practice, but you know what? I can't. So I'm gonna be lazy and play video games for a day. I feel like people use that excuse of, well, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to record, so I can't do it. You know, it's like, no, it's not the same as it's not the same as being trapped in your house. You know?
It's also like this day and time. It's really, 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 really weak sauce to say.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
well, I don't know how. Like, dude, there's a thing called the internet, and it can teach you how to do anything.
It's so, I know that it's such an easily, like, don't be defeated so easily. Like, come on, you know.
That's a great point. You know, one of my band members, his name's Patrick Laird. I've learned so much from Patrick, and he is very much that kind of person. Like, if we need to do something with the band, he's going to figure out how to do it. He's going to put himself out there. He doesn't care if he's going to embarrass himself or who he's going to meet to make something happen. Like I remember in Austin a number of years ago, they had South by Southwest was going on, and Pandora Radio had a big showcase concert. And at the time, Break of Reality was getting a lot of plays on Pandora. We've somehow like beat the system because Pandora thinks we're rock and we're classical and we're all sorts of things. So we pop up everywhere. And Patrick said, I really got to go meet these people. And I said, well, Patrick, we don't know anybody there. And he said, doesn't matter. So he goes in and meets who he has to meet, and he starts talking to all different sorts of people until he met somebody who was like, oh my gosh, I do marketing for Pandora, and your story is perfect. And we ended up like cultivating a relationship with that company because he put himself in a precarious position and just put himself out there and was going to make something happen. And I think there's something to be said for that kind of attitude, especially in our business, you know, where it's so hard to wait for things. I don't think there's many things to wait for anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
Here's one about composition. What do you do to get out of compositional ruts or through writer's block?
Oh, cool. This is something that I think about a lot. And I used to have a board up. I don't have it, but I can explain it. It's really easy.
Is that your whiteboard?
Yeah, I'm a whiteboard.
Okay.
I talk about it a lot.
Another question. Hersey Lane, one of my students asked, can you explain your whiteboard, like creativity thing?
Yeah, this is something that I did over the summer. I was doing a clinic at the Zeltzman Marimba seminar festival, Marimba Festival, ZMF. And Nancy said, like, this is not only good for composers, but good for performers to think about, too. And here's basically what it is I list a bunch of musical topics or components all over a whiteboard or spreadsheet or whatever you want. And in the middle of mine, the word simple is there. And then around it are just tons of words that are scattered around. It could be like harmony, melody, form, verse, chorus, bridge, harmonic rhythm. I mean, you name it, color, shades. But what happens is when I get into a rut, I can go to my little sheet or board or whatever you want, and I can start to look at all of these terms and start thinking about what I have written already and how that relates to all of these different topics. And sometimes one of those will get me out of a rut. Because it'll help me realize, like, oh, I haven't changed chord progression in like a while, or the melody hasn't really developed in a little while, et cetera, et cetera. So that helps me kind of get through some of those writing ruts, I guess. And for performers, too, I think that's really important. Because sometimes when we're learning a really hard piece of music, we're looking at it very from a micro kind of standpoint. Like, I have to learn these notes and this and this and this, and we don't always think a bigger picture kind of thing. So having this list of terms or ideas, my friend Aaron Sibel calls it a menu, a musical menu, can kind of help you navigate through a piece or navigate through composing a piece. So that's really helpful for me. And I think on my board, I mean, I had like hundreds of words on it, and it looked like I was a crazy person just scattered all over the place. but it would help me. So that's an idea for maybe people who are just starting out. Start with some really simple terms, or even take a piece that you're playing and try to figure out all the different musical components going on in that piece, and you can sort of build your board that way, or at least help you get started.
Can you talk a little bit about, there's several questions about what inspires you. You probably get that question a lot, so I'm interested to see how you answer that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think every piece is different. Sometimes things that are happening in the world, like societal events, are inspiring. Like I wrote a piece based off of the Ferguson, Missouri protests that were going on. And sometimes it's other things, like simple things, like me and my wife had a really great day and I want to write her a tune, you know. Sometimes it has nothing to do with anything going on in life at all. It's purely musical. It's just me maybe going to the marimba and I set my mallets down and I'm like, oh wow, that was cool. What was that? And then I can just start to experiment with maybe that little chord or idea. Sometimes there's a mathematical sort of element to what I have going on, like you know, there's maybe there's an idea where there's 4 against 3 and blah blah blah. Like maybe there's a whole section of a piece that's based on a purely mathematical sort of idea and then developed. So I think inspiration comes from so many places, but I will say that my musical language, I think, inspires how I write too, and the kind of music that I listen to now and that I used to listen to when I was younger, that I think I draw a lot from those types of things. And I think one of the questions later is like, what are some of the non-classical you know, inspirations that you have, or what bands did you listen to growing up? So I can talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah, I'd like to know.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
so,
Green Day, Offspring, No Effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know who's a big No Effects fan is Luis Rivera.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a huge No Effects fan.
As
I
should
remember,
we all be.
yeah, I remember going to Luis's apartment in Alabama. He had me over for a gig, and there was just a slew of punk rock CDs. But yeah, I grew up on like 3-chord punk rock music.
What's your favorite punk rock band?
I mean, maybe like, I don't know, I used to listen to MXPX a lot.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I did too.
I just met the lead singer the other day. It was awesome.
Really?
Yeah, he was playing a house concert somewhere.
You live in Austin?
No, he was touring Texas, and somehow he was playing a house show at one of my really good friends' houses, and I started talking to him, and I said, Mike, how many songs have you written in your life? And he was like, I don't know, maybe like 300 or 400. Crazy. But anyway, I grew up on 3-chord punk rock tunes, and then I started writing a lot of songs, and I still songwrite a lot. I play guitar, and then eventually it started I started getting into more developed musical bands, I would say, like Radiohead or Bon Iver, and then at the same time going to college and being immersed in all of the contemporary music going on. So I think I have a unique background in some of the music that I've been immersed in, and I think that comes across in my composing. So maybe for those composers out there, it's okay to like music in the non-classical idiom. Maybe actually that can be helpful for you, and helpful for you to find your own voice as a composer.
It's a really interesting thing to think about what inspires people, and not just from the standpoint of, there's so many sayings about like inspiration, it happens, but it's not as real as the work is. You just do the work that you have to do. And I always think about how different that question must be answered through time. Like, for us, it's very easy to be like, well, I like to listen to this, and I like this, but 200 years ago, we've probably heard more music in our lifetimes as young people than any composer in the 1700s or 1800s heard.
Yeah, that's a good.
Definitely. Yeah.
Because they couldn't. There weren't recordings, and so the idea of like where inspiration comes from is a really, really interesting
No, that's a
one.
great point. Another thing that I would say is I write music every single day. I try to sit down, and even if it's just for a little bit or if it's for a long session, I always just want to write and write and write, and that helps me to stay in the groove and keep up with things. I sometimes don't wait for like the inspirational moment to strike. Sometimes it happens while I'm sitting down and I set time aside to make it happen. So that's really important too. I think it's just like with anything else. Like if you want to get really good at marimba, you just have to practice and spend time with the instrument.
I was reading something just the other day in preparation for this. I thought about bringing it up as like a topic, but I didn't think there was quite enough there. But they were talking about what the aha moment is, as they called it, and what chemically is going on in your brain. And there's a reason why you often have the aha moment when you're doing something else. So if I sit at this desk daily and I'm used to this desk associated with teaching and email and practicing, it might not be associated with, something different that's going to get me through a writer's block scenario or something. And
Sure.
it sounds like there's some science to that
That's a great
epiphany
point.
kind of moment.
What I do is I have a little voice memo on my phone, and anytime I get an idea, if I'm on a walk with my dog or getting coffee, I'll like sing my idea into my phone, and then I can go back later and revisit all of these little themes or riffs or whatever you want to call them. But sometimes I find that there's some nice things in there, and sometimes there isn't. But that's another instance of using technology to kind of help the creative process.
Ben, do you want to do your topic for us today?
Yeah, sure. So, like many percussionists today, including Casey, I discovered Ivan through YouTube a number of years ago for his outstanding recording of Alejandro Vinao's Tumblers. So I wanted to talk today about Alejandro Vinao, and it's actually kind of exciting because I'll be the one to announce it. At the end of February, we're actually going to be recording an episode with Alejandro Vinao. So
That's awesome.
Start reviewing Alejandro's music today. So anyway, and then also before I get on to all the biographical information about Alejandro Vinao, I didn't want to interrupt earlier, but Ivan was talking about citing non-classical music influence in classical music, and I heard Viñao give a lecture relatively recently, and he kind of talks about, I love the kind of craftiness of 12-tone music and serialism and all this, but at the end of the day, a lot of people just don't want to listen to that, whether you like it or not, and so he says that he's trying to find ways to take things like groove, which is something that people connect with, and kind of incorporate that and get that to mesh with these sort of classical ideas. So anyway, just an interesting thought to get us started off here. But Alejandro Vinao, he was born on, let's see here, April 9th, 1951 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And in Argentina, he studied with the Russian composer Jacobo Fischer. And I looked into his music some, and Fischer employed all sorts of different styles and techniques in his own music, including neo-romanticism, neoclassicism, polytonality, 12-tone technique, serialism, and free atonality. And he kind of never settled on any one style. He was constantly experimenting and reinventing himself with that. So anyway, that was Viñao's kind of earliest compositional training. In 1976, he was awarded the British Council Scholarship to study in London, where he studied at the Royal College of Music, and then later on he studied at the City University of London, where he received his PhD in composition in 1988, and he's lived in Britain since that 1976 scholarship to go move to Britain. During the 1980s, he regularly worked at the Institute for Research and Coordination Acoustic Music, which is abbreviated IRCAM, which was established by the French government under the direction of Pierre Boulez. So he had worked in that kind of Boulez electroacoustic umbrella, if you will. In 1987, he was also the composer in residence at MIT. In 1994, he was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in Composition. And his music, these are all in his own words, is characterized by the use of pulsed rhythmic structures to create large-scale form and by a melodic writing which, as in the case of much non-European music, develops through rhythm rather than harmony. And he's written a wide variety of music for acoustic and electric mediums, including opera, music theater, choral, and solo compositions. Some of my favorite works I've heard of his are actually choral works, which I think a lot of percussionists aren't so familiar with. But because he takes such an interest in rhythm and rhythmic development in his music, he's also written a substantial body of works, especially in recent years, for percussion or percussion chamber music, I think would be a more appropriate categorization. The first of these works is the one I mentioned earlier, which was Tumblers, which was originally written for Nancy Zeltzman in 1989 and 1990. It's about 18 minutes long. It's for marimba, violin, and pre-recorded electronic sounds. Then in 1993, he wrote a marimba concerto with chamber orchestra in 3 movements for Robert Van Cise. In 2001, he wrote Con Variations, which is approximately 10 minutes, for a very large consortium of players, I believe directed by Nancy Zeltzman, and it was premiered by Jack Van Geem. In 2004, the Peabody Conservatory commissioned him to write Estudios de Frontera, which is a 17-minute percussion quintet. Did I say that's from 2004? If I didn't, it is. It was written kind of for Robert Van Cise to perform with his students, and Svet Stoyanov actually has a fantastic recording of this piece. Actually, I think it's just the first movement on YouTube. It's worth checking out for sure. 2006, Michael Burritt and Alan Chow commissioned him to write Riff, which is a 14-minute long marimba and piano duo. In 2006, he wrote a marimba and pipe duo for a large commissioning consortium. A lot of his pieces involve a consortium. Called Arabesco Infinito, which is a very challenging work with often the marimba and vibraphone kind of trailing each other by 1/16th note in canon, sort of devices like that. In 2008, he wrote Formas del Viento for marimba and vibes with flute. It's about 19 minutes long. Version 1 from 2008 was for 1 percussionist. Then a year later, he revised it in a 2 percussion version, so 1 person plays marimba and 1 person plays vibraphone. 2011, he wrote Book of Grooves, which is about 22 minutes long. It's 4 movements long. It's a marimba duo, again for a large commissioning consortium, which I was part of as the University of Illinois Graduate Percussion Studio. In 2012, he wrote Burritt Variations for Michael Burritt. That's an 11-minute long marimba solo. In 2013, he wrote Water, which is a 3-movement sextet for percussion and piano, again, for a large commissioning consortium, which our very own Megan Arns is on a wonderful recording of that with Eastman Percussion Ensemble, directed by Michael Burritt. And in 2015, just last year, he completed a percussion trio called Relative Riffs, again for a large consortium, and that's about 19 minutes long. Right now, he's working on a piece for marimba and electronics, about 10 minutes long, commissioned by Jeannie Zhang, who is the professor at the Central Conservatory of Music in Beijing. And his next planned work after that is a work for Kunihiko Komori, which is a work for marimba, guitar, and double bass trio, which is going to be about 15 to 20 minutes long. And that commissioning consortium, they're still accepting people if anyone's interested in kind of joining that commission. And I actually, when I was researching, I didn't think about this ahead of time, but it's interesting that Viñao is very closely associated with a few percussionists, namely, in my mind, Michael Burritt, Robert Van Cise, Svet Stoyanov, and Nancy Zeltzman. And 3 of those people are the teachers of all the people on this podcast.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's funny.
Can I show you something really quick?
Kind of Viñao's music in a nutshell.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to show you something, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, hey, well, he's working on that. Ben, how's your text messages going over there?
My computer is broken, so my phone is sitting right next to my iPad.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
everyone.
Oh,
see
what was
that?
it? What was that, Ivan? They were
Oh,
talking
let me
about.
show you. That's what I'm practicing right now. It's
Oh.
Book of
Oh, wow,
Grooves.
look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm playing it in March with Phil O'Banion at Temple University. We're playing two of them. So that's what I've been practicing right now. So you were talking about Viñao this whole time, and I was like, he's right
Should be
behind me.
practicing.
You're right. You're right. I should be.
And it's interesting, definitely with Book of Grooves, and I played Estudios de Frontera with Svet on the solo part. Both of those pieces to me, like if you were ever afraid of mixed meter, especially 16th note mixed meter, you will never ever fear it ever again. It becomes so easy to play those pieces because they're so hard.
Yeah, that's true. You know, something I think about a lot, like with this piece and tumblers as well. Sometimes thinking about all the different time signature changes elongated over a more like normal time signature.
Yeah.
Really helps me like groove the piece. Sometimes thinking about it in these bigger chunks. So if anybody's playing Viñao out there, maybe that's one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and like it actually after a while, like I said, like 5/16, it has a certain groove to it. Like it's not so foreign anymore after you've done it enough. And it's interesting with Book of Grooves, or especially Arabesco Infinito. Svet talks about these pieces are almost kind of foolproof. Like if you're good enough to get through the piece, you're probably good enough to have a very good performance out of it. That you would hear a bad performance of those pieces because it's just impossible to even begin to put it on if it's not perfect.
There's a compositional technique right there. Write really, really hard music, and then like only excellent people even approach it. Yeah, I've seen that fail a lot. Yeah.
But even
Somehow-
that there's like
somehow
so
it
much
cannot.
music built into that. I've never really thought of that before, but that's so
Yeah.
true. I mean, even if you're playing it like straight or just on the page, I don't know. There's so much music there.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like Rite of Spring. If you can do exactly what the ink tells you to do, you're in pretty good shape. Like there's not much you need to add to it. And Viñao's music is very much like that. Like everything you need is written in ink on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had a question for all of you actually, because all of these pieces I've heard performed a lot, or at least heard of being performed a lot, except for probably obvious reasons, his marimba concerto. Has anyone ever heard that live?
We did, right, Laurel?
I don't know. I'm trying to remember if at PASIC a few years ago, Van Cise did a workshop of like excerpts of different marimba concerti with the chamber orchestra, and I might have heard part of it.
I think I'm almost positive there is a recording of it.
Okay.
And in fact, when I was studying at University of Illinois, William Mersch told me that Con Variations was partially commissioned to make an easier marimba work than the concerto.
Gosh.
Hey, you guys mentioned rhythms. Look at this little number by Ken Bueno for snare drum.
Woo!
Yeah, that was fun. I got to premiere that. Yeah.
What is that, Casey? Piece?
It's actually really cool. It's a Ken Bueno snare drum piece called The Articulate Surface. Yeah.
Cool.
It's really fun to look at.
I like his music a lot.
Really, I like the way that question went. Megan said, "What is that, Casey?" And Casey replied,
I know.
And then he said, "I actually like it a lot."
Yeah, and while we're on this composer kick, we'll probably contact Ken Wayne and I'll be like, dude,
You should invite Ken. That's funny.
Yeah. Megan, do you have a question for Ivan?
Yeah, Ivan, I was just curious about one of your semi-recent projects with Break of Reality, which was your involvement with American musicians abroad. Mm-hmm. You guys went to Kazakhstan. Can you tell us about that program and your experience abroad?
Yeah. So the State Department has a program called American Music Abroad, where they select musicians via an audition process to be music ambassadors for the State Department. So essentially you travel to different countries that they assign you, and you play concerts and you give workshops for people who typically don't get to experience American music. And so far, we've been to Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Brazil, and Haiti. Our most recent trip was to Haiti. And it was an amazing experience. One of the most unforgettable things I think we've done as a band, especially going to a place like Turkmenistan, for example, which is right next to North Korea on the human rights list.
Wow.
And many of the people that we met probably won't ever meet other Americans in their lifetime. And they loved having us there. And it was, I think, really special for them to get to hear a different sound and a different style. And we really let loose. They let us do our show, and we were very energetic and raucous. And I think they appreciated that because they're not very accustomed to those kinds of concerts. Everything is a lot about, especially in that country, perfection. Everything needs to be perfect, and we're not that way. We play in a very raw style, and although it's refined, it's still in a rock kind of style. And I remember doing a workshop there, and actually, speaking of finding inspiration, I found inspiration in this trip, and I wrote a piece about it. But this is what happened. A girl at a workshop said to us, "Oh, we don't improvise or we don't play jazz." So immediately we had an improv session, and they improvised music for the very first time in their lives. And you know, they were so excited to be able to do that, to be able to experience music making on that different level. And I'll never forget her. You know, she kind of jumped up in her chair and she said, "Oh my gosh, this is so fun!" And then she would get quiet and kind of look around and say, "We don't improvise."
It's okay, and I'm doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And she was looking at her teachers, and her teachers were looking at us, and it was just weird and awesome. So I wrote a piece about that whole thing for marimba and contrabass flute, and the marimba player also recites text. And the text that the marimba player recites is from this story from Turkmenistan. The piece is called "This Is Like Jazz," and that's what the girl said to us. She was like, "Oh my gosh, this is like jazz," even though we're not like jazz.
Right.
But for her, it was very foreign to her, you know. So I wrote that piece. It was commissioned by a duo called Caballito Negro, which is Terry Longshore, who teaches out in Oregon, and Tessa Brinkman. They play in this group together. And they basically let me have free reign on whatever I wanted to write about. And they play a lot of world music, and I just thought the piece's message made a lot of sense for them to play. So
Very
yeah,
cool.
Anyway, it's an awesome program, American Music Abroad. Anybody can audition, really. They have auditions, I think, once a year, and it's a great program, and we just had a blast doing it. It's been awesome.
Very cool. So, and does that go by calendar year? So, were you a group for 2015? So now you're done, or will you go?
Yeah. So now we're done. So
Okay.
I think what we're going to do is take a year off and then reapply because we liked it so much.
Cool. Okay.
And
so
another
you
part
can do that.
Yeah, you can. I think there's only a certain amount of times that you can do that, but you can reapply. One of the other cool things is that you also learn things. Like they put you in collaborative settings with local musicians, so you get to learn about their music and their culture as well, and that was really awesome too. So
yeah, that's
a great program.
Very cool.
We have a great Facebook question from Pius Chang. It is, how come nobody will play my music, and what can I do to? It's no problem. Yeah, what can I do to compose better? Please help me.
I love seeing your back and forth on Facebook, Casey. Like it could be a comment from someone that I don't even know, but somehow it'll turn into a Casey and Pius kind of thing, which is always hilarious.
I know. We'll like invade their topic, like or their question. Like someone will be like, "Hey, is anybody interested? I have a lost puppy that needs a good home," and Pius will be like, "Casey sucks," and just begin this,
They always end the same way. It always ends with Pius making a comment about Casey and LED lights, and Casey saying you're bald, and then that's the end.
And then we run out of steam. Yeah, we run out of steam right about then. Yeah,
That's funny.
It is. You guys know Liam Ting, right? The like all-star amazing steel pan player.
Yeah.
Liam Teague. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He thought we were. He told me once he thought we were serious. and he would. He's such a like the sweetest human being on the planet, and like such a peaceful, like kind, loving person. Yeah, I mean. Anyway.
Oh.
That's why we can't have him on, because it wouldn't last a whole hour. You guys would run out of insults.
Oh, Pius and I? Yeah, we wouldn't be able to.
Didn't last an hour.
Yeah, we'll have my boy on someday and tease him a little bit. But
no, there'd have to be 2 episodes. There'd be the first one, which was like the attempts at getting started, and then there would be the actual one.
The battle.
The outtakes, yeah.
But we got through Ted Atkatz though.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
He and I mean, it's a challenge for Ben and I every day to not make stupid jokes every second. Hey, but we do.
So do you have a real Facebook question, Casey?
I was just gonna say we have a real Facebook question from Michael Newmeyer. He says.
I thought Casey was just gonna say the same thing again.
Yeah. Let's see. Michael Newmeyer. What are the pros and cons of teaming up with a company versus self-publishing? Should a composer self-publish?
Yes. Yes, a composer should self-publish, especially today where you have things like YouTube and SoundCloud and Vimeo and Facebook videos to help market your music. I think probably before all of that stuff, having a publisher might have made more sense. But you really have a lot of tools that you need to be able to get your music out there. And those tools are most oftentimes free. It doesn't cost anything to upload to YouTube or to put something up on Facebook. And financially speaking, it makes a ton of sense to self-publish. For example, in a typical publishing deal, the composer will keep 10% of sheet music revenue, and the publishing company will keep 90%. And if you self-publish, then you can keep all of the profits after you pay for your expenses. For example, I sell a lot of my music via PayPal, and I will send PDFs to people, and I'll write them a personal email. There's not a ton of overhead costs for that, so that's really great, and that saves a lot of funds. And then, by creating more income, it allows me to sustain a living doing what I love doing and continuing to create works, specifically for percussion, but of all sorts. And I think if I didn't self-publish, I wouldn't be able to do what I do today.
So I have a question for you, Ivan, but first I also want to make a quick comment that John Mackey, who writes a lot of wind band music, John Mackey has a great blog post about this topic where I think he actually even goes into the details of like how much you make it, whatever, just kind of like the more mathematical version of what you're talking about. But one thing that I noticed about your music is you do sell a lot of music as PDFs, and you write a very nice, personal email and basically say, as someone that makes my living as a composer, I appreciate that you would keep this to yourself and don't distribute it. Have you, did you ever go through any doubts about people wanting to distribute it, or were you, you felt pretty comfortable with it, or?
Yes, I kind of feel like if somebody wants to copy your work, they're going to figure out a way to do it, whether it's through PDFs or whether it's through photocopying and then uploading to computer or whatever the case is. I think it's really important for people to realize that this sharing and copying music really does have an effect on the writer. And I think because that note comes from me specifically and not a big company, And because I specialize it to that person's name, and if I know the person or if I met them before, I'll always try to mention whatever I can just to make that connection. And, you know, honestly, fingers crossed, but I haven't seen anything online where my music is out there up for grabs. And that's awesome. And I think that's a testament to our percussion community and how supportive we are of each other. And honestly, like, you know, let's say somebody did share it around or whatever. I mean, sure, that's bad. But it's going to get played, probably, if somebody is willing to, you know, steal it. And the composer does make some income sometimes when a piece is played. And when a piece is played, that's marketing for your piece. Yeah. So, you know, it's not the end of the world, but you know, of course, prefer that people maintain that sort of dignity within our relationship, the performer and composer relationship. But it doesn't worry me, but it does worry publishing companies. So if I was published, it would be much more difficult for me to sell music the way I want to sell it. You know, so I have control over the way I sell it and how I release it. What's also nice is that if I finish a piece today, I could technically publish it today. Whereas if I worked with a publishing company, it might take 6 months, or it could take however long to really get it out there. So I just have a lot of control over how my music gets out there, and you know, how it connects with people. I think that makes a big difference when it comes directly from the composer.
Casey, you do not sell your music as PDFs, right?
Damn it, Ben, you're making me look dumb.
No, that's okay. I do both. I do PDFs, but I also do hard copies as well. And I try to meet the demands of the different kinds of players out there.
We've thought a lot about it, and I'm glad. I'm totally kidding, Ben. I'm glad you mentioned it because I was going to mention it. Laurel and I mean, every day, Laurel, someone requests a PDF.
Yeah. But you and I happen to feel the same. Like, if I'm buying a score, I want this. I don't want to print it and deal with it fitting to the page and then being super small. I want to buy the score because it's more likely to be readable and I can file it away easier.
It's real encouraging to hear you put it the way you do, Ivan. I mean, it's really, and I think you're right. Like, the integrity of our field is going to protect us, and yeah, I don't know. I'm still thinking a lot about it, and I might go to that someday. I think I'm still vibing off a conversation I had with Johann Spitzer from Spitzer Publications, and he talked about if you do PDFs, you never know what condition it's going to appear in. They might print it. It may be stapled in the corner, and people may end up getting the impression that this is how it comes, or something. I think I feel less about that. I think I'm slowly getting more inclined to just do it, because man, we certainly spend
a lot of trips to the post office, I'm sure.
Sure, yeah. Well, you know, what's interesting is some people like to have, and I'm like you, Laurel, I like to have the boundness. I love the physical aspect. Like, I still buy CDs, you know.
Yeah, I still buy books.
Right. But some people love the immediacy of getting something. So, like, they'll order something, and maybe later that night I can send it their way, and they can start working on it, like, that day. Whereas sometimes if you're shipping stuff out, it could take a little longer, you know.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm like the opposite persuasion. Like, I like the electronic files, and Casey's argument of, like, you know, if someone does a crappy job printing it and it's stapled or whatever, then it makes the publisher look bad. For me, if my corners get dinged up or something goes wrong with it, I can throw it away and print off a new one and have it look like brand new. So it's kind of like, you know. And
that's a good point. Yeah. I used to do a lot of my own, like, printing, and then I would go to Staples and have people. And now I have somebody in Long Island. Her name is Diana. She works for a company called Long Island Music Engravers, and it's the same person that Elliot Cooper Cole uses. to do all of our printing and shipping. So let's say Steve Weiss says, hey, Ivan, we want to order such and such pieces. I can send an email to Diana, and she'll take care of that stuff, which is pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's work for you. That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of work just, keeping up with it.
Totally.
Yeah. No, I'm really like feeling that way more and more. It just seems
well,
like
if you ever have any questions, Casey, you let me know.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
I might. And yeah, it happens so much, especially international orders. They just say, "Hey, can I have this
Yeah, that's very true too. When you're shipping, not just domestic. Yeah.
Nathan Child says, what elements can composers include in their compositions to help performers better interpret the subtleties and nuances of a piece?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I really liked that question. That's one of my freshmen here at JMU, and I thought, man, that's and of course I'm thinking the answer is, well, you want to put all your details like dynamics and stuff like that, but I think he means another layer. I think
you're right. You know what helps me a lot, and it's one thing that I learned from the conductor of the Eastman Wind Ensemble. His name is Mark Scatterday. When he is directing a piece, he will always write adjectives above the score, so that he gets to the podium and he looks down and he sees these words that really help him get into a particular zone or place for him to convey the piece the way he wants to. And I'm not afraid to do that in my pieces either, using language to really convey a particular emotion or just like a state of being, so that when somebody is playing a piece, not only are they thinking about all of the little musical nuances, but there's a larger like emotional state happening. So I never shy away from using words. And some people are very traditional, and they don't like to explain things too much in their music if it's not in a musical kind of term. But I have no problem with that, and that helps me a lot. And I think that helps performers, play it a certain way too.
What about physically? What about like idiomatically? Are you thinking about that when you're writing too?
Like at the instrument, like at each instrument?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so, Megan, a little bit. Like, I think a lot of it is because I play these instruments. But sometimes, like, I'll write pieces on guitar, and then it changes the whole game in terms of idiomatic playing. But I think I do adjust a little bit. Like, if I write something on the keyboard, or like the piano, and then I get to the marimba, or I realize, like, oh, it's going to be tricky, what I'll try to do is maintain the same idea, but just make little changes to make it a little bit more comfortable to play. So it still has the same idea and musically has the same sort of integrity, but it just allows for the music to really speak, But everybody is different, I feel like. Casey, when you're writing your music, and this is awesome, I think, it's super virtuosic, and I think it's pushing the percussion genre, and it's pushing the players to do things that they're not used to. And that's awesome, and I feel like, I don't think about that stuff as much, but I think every instrument has that person who does that, who pushes the limits in new ways. So I think that's really pretty cool. And I don't think about that as much. Although I will say that rhythmically, even though my music sounds really, sometimes sounds nice to listen to, it can be really challenging rhythmically, especially the duos and trios and quartets. There's a lot of stuff going on that I think sometimes people at first listen don't really catch, but then they start to play the piece and they're like, oh my gosh, like I have to maintain this particular metric figure while this other person is in a completely different thing. And that's like small elements of like maybe a Viñao in my music that maybe people don't realize is there. It's sometimes not just like a pop tune,
Specifically, one of those that stuck out to me was in 2+1. a lot of the time one player is playing like in 3/4, while the other playing in 12/16, basically on top of it.
Yeah,
Which
that
was
sounds
like,
right.
yeah, it's like 4 groupings of 3 versus 3 groupings of 4, and it was surprisingly difficult, I thought, to actually get that to line up and sound correct and not super mechanical, because it's like a sweet sounding piece.
Right, yeah, that's a great point. And I think like some of my other tunes, like Bloom, the Marimba Quartet, there's parts in there where I think all 4 players are metrically opposed. So yeah, it can be challenging, and that's fun too. That's cool.
Yeah, yeah. Another Facebook question. This will probably be our last one for time, but Robbie Green says, what would you like to see more of from performers of your music?
Wow.
I like this question. It's kind of like, it's kind of saying, so
Right
how's everyone out there doing?
Right. I think, like I mentioned earlier, I tend to not write a ton in my pieces in terms of every single detail. But that doesn't mean, that I want everybody to just stick to the page and play everything straight and mechanically. I want people to explore with phrasing and coloring and dynamics and making the piece their own. I think, I kind of leave a template of music for people, but there's still enough room for people to embed their own ideas and their own thoughts into the piece, and I would just encourage people to keep thinking about that. Don't just play what's on the page, and that goes for any music, I guess, but I think mine specifically, like, I think it really comes to life when people put themselves in it.
Ivan, thanks so much for joining us today. This was really cool, and you're just awesome dude, well spoken, and it's cool. I'm sure all my students' heads are just gonna like explode, and they're gonna be super stoked. So it's
Well, I appreciate it so much, guys. I think what you guys are doing is awesome too for our percussion community, and I commend you guys, and I hope that you guys keep going and do another 29 episodes. Is that right? Was this number 29?
It was 27, I think.
unless
Okay.
I said it wrong, which I have done before. It does
I think
get
you're
long.
right. I think you're right, Casey.
Yeah, I'm wrong. Anyway, I hope you just keep doing this because it's awesome. And you're gonna do Viñao, right?
So we've got some exciting. We have a nice composition month lined up. We've got Viñao coming, and we've got Mark Applebaum coming,
Wow.
and we have Yuri Seo coming, and I think that's then we'll be all caught up, right, Ben?
I think so.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
No, thanks so much. Yeah, Ep Percussion's been really fun, and thanks to everyone listening. And enjoy it while you can, because pretty soon, like, I'm just gonna start pushing my agenda on it, and all I'm gonna be doing is selling my crap. Like, pretty soon. I don't know when. I just need enough.
Once we get enough listeners, he has a number in mind.
Once we get enough listeners, it's just gonna Yeah,
we'll start selling swag and stuff.
I do
these
like
t-shirts.
I know. Yeah. So the T-shirts came from Ben. Ben sent these to us all for Christmas. It was a really, really cool surprise. So yeah, thanks again, Ben.
Thanks,
That's
Ben.
awesome.
Yeah. Anyway, take it easy, you guys. Ivan, thanks so much, and
Thanks,
I'll
guys.
see you around Facebook and see you around the next pieces you write.
Sounds great. Cheers, guys.